welcome you tonight to the first of our vertical parenting series. We're excited to be here. I hope you've downloaded the handouts that are there on the Facebook page. There are 3 pages that you can download for tonight. I'd love for you to have those as a handout to follow along with. We'll keep those on the page so that you can download those at any point. You can print them out, use them on your phone, however you'd like, iPad, whatever that might be. Our goal here through this series is to help parents raise children in a way that will cause them to love the Lord, love them, and love others. We're calling it vertical parenting because this is really what it means to parent children, is do it from a vertical perspective. And when you get the vertical right first, then the horizontal becomes a lot easier. So we're looking at 7 essentials over the next 7 weeks for building a family who loves and believes. So, of course, these are interesting days in which we live, and we wrestled a lot with whether or not to even do this series in light of what's going on today in our world. But the more we thought about it, the more we thought, really, this is very relevant. This is all of a sudden very relevant because parents are put into a place they weren't a month ago. You've all of a sudden become the educator, the physical trainer, you're the soccer coach, you're the entertainment, you're the parent, you're the teacher, you're the principal, you're everything. You're the cook, the chef, you're all of that. So what better day to look at how do we do this as believers? How do we do what Jesus called us to do and have our children at the end of this time and at the end of the parenting process still love us and still love the Lord? So that's our goal over these next 7 weeks. Some of the topics that are ahead, of course, tonight we're going to be talking about choosing a new way of parenting, a way that follows the pattern that God has established as it relates to us. We're going to talk next week about how to lead the way instead of being led astray. When there's so many distractions in the world today, and there's so many ideas about how to parent. And as believers, we're called to lead the way. We're not to be led astray by our kids or what others tell us or what social media dictates, but we're to be confident by faith, walking in the way that God has us to parent. The third week, we're going to talk about focus on the cookie and not the cookie cutter. Man, there's so much to know about each of the children that God has given you. Their unique talents and personality and gifts and interests. And when you know those, including birth order, when you know those, you can focus on each specific cookie and the design that God has for them, which requires different parenting principles for each one. So we'll talk about that the third week. The fourth week, we're going to talk about how to celebrate and enjoy every season in parenting because it changes. The years of 0 to 2 are a lot different than 3 to 5, than 6 to 8, and so forth. If you understand the seasons, then you can flex and adjust along the way and find great joy in those seasons, and not have to call them the terrible 2s or the dreaded teen years. You can look forward to those with some great joy. And then the fifth week, we're going to talk about discipline and how to discipline in a way that directs the heart. We'll get into that more that week. Week 6 will be what you do consistently will be what sticks. And then finally, week 7 will be about how to make home the greatest place on earth. So I'm excited about the weeks ahead. I'll go ahead and tell you up front, if you have questions along the way that you'd say, man, I would really like to hear the answer to this question, I'd suggest that you go ahead and submit those into the Facebook or YouTube conversation and let us know. At the end of the series, we'll do a night where we just answer questions. And we won't necessarily have to use your name, but we can answer those questions. So with all that in mind and now established, let me introduce who's here at the table tonight. I'm Brian Treadaway, and this is Heather Treadaway, my wife.
Hello.
We have been married 30 years this June.
That's right.
And God has blessed us with 5 kids, and they are all much older than they used to be. And we have 2 of them with us tonight. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us about them.
First. I'm Holly Vanderberg. I've been married to Ryan for 4 years, and I've got 2 kids, Riley, who's 3, and Marshall, who's just 5 weeks old.
And I'm Taylor Kinsman. I just got married in July, and we are pregnant with our first baby girl due in October.
All right, very
Also,
good.
I'm second born.
There
Yes,
we go.
and I'm fourth born.
There
Forgot
you
that as
go.
part of my
Yes,
introduction.
that's important.
That
Back to the
is-
story.
That is important to know, and maybe you'll see some of the dynamics of that tonight even, which will be great. So tonight I want us to talk about choosing a new way of parenting, choosing to parent intentionally for the purposes of God. So on the handout there, I've used a couple of quotes from a man that you're going to become familiar with through this study. His name is Paul David Tripp. He's written some great books, and one particularly on parenting. He's got several, but one in particular, he has a quote from, he says this: "Nothing is more important in your life than being one of God's tools to form a human soul." I think, wow, what a privilege, what an opportunity, and what a responsibility to know that we have been entrusted with the responsibility of shaping a life and a soul. And that child will get their impression, not just of others and life and themselves, but their view of God will be determined based on how you parent them. So what an incredible responsibility, but what an incredible privilege as well. So a couple of points tonight to start some discussion. The first I'd say is this, is then if you want to parent with a new way, it begins with this idea of knowing that God has gifted parents to be the way that he brings forth new life. The scripture says in 1 Peter 3:7, we are heirs together, recipients, we've received an inheritance together of the grace of life. When a couple marries and they begin to have children, they are receiving that inheritance. God has chosen couples to be the way that he brings life into this world. What an incredible privilege, what a blessing, something that should humble us, something that should cause us to cry out to him and move us deeply. What a privilege. This is not something we evolved into. This is not something we fell into. This is something that God has designed. He has perfect design in choosing a husband and a wife to be the ones who bring forth life, and they be the models for helping that new human soul get their picture of God. The second thing is that God has blessed you as parents with the opportunity to show your children God's heart and his hand. They look to us to see, what is God like? What is his heart like? How does he feel toward us? What is he moved by? What makes him smile? And then what are his hands like? Are they soft? Are they gentle? Are they rough? Are they harsh? They get their impressions of God based on how we parent them. And I love the fact that God himself says that the way he relates to us is as a father. In 2 Corinthians 6, it says, "I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty." This is how God relates to us as a father. So we have to take that into account when we are parenting. Now, Heather and I had some ideas about parenting before we had children, but boy, all of that changes the moment that child shows up in your arms. And all of a sudden, everything is different. I want to ask Holly for just a moment. She's now had two children, and I know that has had to have had an impact on how you view parenting. So talk about that for just a moment. What is different now that you've had children? How has that changed the way you see parenting?
I will say when it comes to I don't know, my view of parenting obviously has been what my parents were to me, and having my own kids now and raising them and disciplining them, I realize now it's like, oh my goodness, now I know what mom and dad felt like whenever we were little. And now I understand more why they disciplined the way they did, why they had the rules that they had, why they, led the way that they did. That whenever I was younger was either, can be confusing or frustrating at times. That now, I'm like, oh, I totally get, all what they did because that's what I'm doing for my kids.
That's good. That's good. So Taylor, you're expecting, and I know that has had to already have changed some of the way you're thinking. What does it mean to you now to be a parent that's different now that you're expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of puts everything into perspective. Obviously, having 3 older siblings that have children and growing up in a family of 5, I've seen parenting in many different aspects. But I think viewing it from the perspective of like, this is not just okay, when they're born to when they're 18, then my job's done. But it's the long game, and it's, raising your child in the way and teaching them about Jesus, teaching them that love and that connection, and, that it's a parent's job and privilege, like you said, to be able to raise up a child in the way. It's very exciting to me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Good. So third point with this is that God has not only given us this opportunity and privilege, but the responsibility of shaping our child's hearts. Not just behavior, but their heart. And when you understand that, then it changes how you parent. I want to read another quote from Paul David Tripp. He says, "Your work as a parent is of extreme value because God has designed that you would be a principled, consistent, and faithful tool in His hands for the purpose of creating God consciousness and God submission in your children. You can't create this yourself, only God can, but you have been appointed to be an irreplaceable tool in His powerful hands." What a responsibility and what an opportunity to know that our role is to shape their heart. Our role is to shape how they view life, how they view themselves, and most importantly, how they view God, what they will think about Him, how they will perceive that He sees them. And our responsibility as parents is to shape that in them. That's not just the church's role, it's primarily a parent's role. Now, when you choose this new way of parenting, you have to set aside some other ways of parenting, because there's a lot of ways that people do parent today. And if you follow social media, if you watch TV, if you watch movies, you see all of these out there. You talk to friends, you're going to see some other approaches to parenting. And I'm just going to go ahead and refer to those as lesser approaches, because there are a lot of ways out there that don't set this standard that begins with, I want to help shape my children's heart to see God properly. So let's talk for just a moment about some of those other approaches, lesser parenting approaches that we have to intentionally set aside. And we're going to be honest with you about some of the areas that we have walked in ourselves here in just a moment. Let's talk about these. One of those is fear-based parenting. Boy, it's easy in the world we live in today to see headlines, see topics, see things that are out there, and all of a sudden choose to live and even parent out of fear. Fear of what our child might experience, might see, might get into. And if that becomes your driving force, it'll affect how you parent. You'll end up being more nervous than you will passionate. You'll end up being fearful more of the time than you will faithful than the time. You'll find that your emotions drive you instead of clear thought processes and logic, and you'll find yourself being led by you instead of being led by God. So fear-based parenting cannot be our approach. The second is behavior modification parenting. Now that's kind of a long term that really just says you want to attempt to shape what your child does, not necessarily who they become. You become more concerned about their behavior. You become consistent or obsessed with modifying how they act, and not necessarily so obsessed with their heart. And boy, you can do that. You can make your child mind. I remember going through times in parenting where the goal was, stop the behavior and cause right behavior. And as a parent, you can raise your voice, you can use discipline as a motivator, and you can get a child to do something. But the thing we learned along the way was, it's not enough just to get your child to do something if in the process you end up losing their heart. Yeah. So when you talk about behavior modification parenting, you're obsessed with more of just the actions than the heart. Image control parenting is another one today that happens where the parent becomes obsessed with how other people view them. And so they become fixated on comparison. They compare their parenting and their child to other parents and their children, and you get obsessed with your image. I want to look right. I want to look good in front of other people. I don't want someone to think that I'm not a good parent. I don't want someone to think that my children are not good children. The next one is self-benefit parenting. This is where you benefit because of how it makes you feel. You do it because it's good for you. It feels good for you. And there are some moments that feel great in parenting. There's some moments that your children make you proud, and there's some moments that they don't make you proud. And so if you're parenting from this perspective of only what it does for me, you're going to come upon some difficult times, because you're going to find some moments where you're going to think, well, I'm not so happy in this moment. And you're going to get onto your children and expect them to be the ones to make you happy, when that's not how it was designed to work. The next one is high control parenting. This happens a lot in Christian homes, sadly, where Christian parents become focused on the behavior and the actions, and they apply lots of control, lots of rules. Sadly, what happens is they apply so much pressure that the children obey as long as they're under the rules, but the minute they get out from under the rules and the roof, they're doing their own thing. They end up living double lives, and they rebel, they go off and do their own thing, and that starts often from a high control parenting process. The next one is herd mentality parenting. This is when you parent based on what everybody else is doing. And boy, with social media today, you can get on mom's groups and you can follow what everybody else is doing, and you can get lost in all of the options that are out there if you're trying to follow the crowd. The next one is reactionary parenting. This happens when husband and wife say, well, I'm definitely not going to do what my parents did to me. And so they set that up as a standard and say, I'm not going to do that. And so they discount anything that those parents did and choose to go another direction. And so they're reactionary in what they're doing, and it really causes an imbalance in parenting. And then the last one is out-of-breath parenting. And sadly, I see this happen to a lot of parents today. They are trying to do everything that's available in their child's world. They want to make sure they get to this event, this opportunity, this thing, and this thing. And at the end of the day, they are absolutely worn out. They don't want to have anything left to do, or they don't want to have anything to do with their children at that point, because they're worn out, they're tired, they're frustrated, they're emotionally spent. And so they don't have any energy left to give to their children. So I call all of these lesser parenting approaches. And as Heather and I were raising our children, we had to wrestle with these. For me, I personally struggled with this idea of high control parenting. There were times I wanted to try to manage their behavior more than meet their heart. And I had to go through a lot of disappointment and struggles and frustrations in the process before I realized that wasn't working. So I'm going to be quiet for just a little bit. I'm going to let Heather talk and say, what was it for you that you had to intentionally avoid when it comes to some of these lesser parenting approaches?
I think at different stages in all of our kids' lives, I think we fell into all of these categories, really. But especially in the early years, when I was in my early 20s with 3 young kids before Taylor and Truett came along, I know the behavior modification and the image control parenting was a very, very big deal for me, because I didn't know what I was doing, and so I didn't want anyone. I mean, I had to act like I knew what I was doing, of course, and I just felt this pressure of, if my kids disobeyed or didn't do what I expected of them when we were out, that it would look bad upon us. And we were on staff at the time at a church, and the kids' grandfather was pastor, so that added another level of pressure. So
all right, very good. So Holly, you're was it 3 years now into parenting? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
With 2, and I'm sure some of these are already pulling at you. You feel the tension for some of these.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
What would you say you already are having to intentionally avoid in regards to these lesser approaches?
To me, the one that stands out the most is the image control parenting. I think, a lot of what Mom was saying, I want to make sure that, when people see, I mean, Marshall's only a month old, so he's not doing anything
He's
wrong.
exempt.
But Riley, if they see her, react or disobey or have a meltdown, they don't want them to think like, oh my goodness, she does not know how to parent, or she does not know what she's doing, or I would have handled that so differently.
Yep.
Because I want everyone to think that she's doing a good job, she's raising a good kid.
Yeah.
And of course, they don't get to see all of the wonderful moments. A
That's
lot
right.
of times it's just, the bad ones at the store whenever you got to put the toy back. Promise it's not always like this.
Exactly. So, Taylor, you're about to come into the world of parenting. And what do you see already as something you have to guard yourself against? And maybe tied with that, for your generation, which of these would you say are more likely pulls?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, again, the image control one seems probably the most natural. I think especially with social media nowadays, everybody wants to post that perfect little Snapchat of their kid in their pretty little dress that doesn't have like food or dirt or mud or anything all over it to make it look like their day was perfect. I think that would be easy for me to fall into, and especially with the generation today. I think the herd mentality parenting is another one for this generation because of the mom groups or just social media alone. People want to fit in. As women, that's a problem already. Sure. And then when you have that growing thing of a mom's group, you want to fit into those, and you want to look like, I want to look like that mom does. She bakes cookies every day and her kids love them, but her kids eat broccoli every day. And it's just one of those tricky things of people are wanting approval of other people.
Yeah, that's good. And those approaches, one of the things that they do is they absolutely wear you out.
Yes.
Now, parenting will wear you out, period. It does that. It's designed for that.
That's right.
But it's one thing to be physically exhausted. It's another to be emotionally and mentally and even spiritually exhausted, where you don't have anything to draw from. Yeah. You don't have a place of strength deeper inside that keeps you going, that pulls you through the difficult times. And all of those approaches to parenting will do that to you. And that's why it's essential that we choose a new way of parenting, something that has a different well that we draw from, something that has a different center that we pull from. So a passage that is just so incredibly relevant for us today is Psalm 127. And there we get such great wisdom from God about this whole calling to be parents. I want to read this to you and just make a few comments. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it." In other words, if God is not the one who is the lead builder in your parenting process, then what you are spending your money, your time, and your energy at will really be in vain. Yeah. It'll be frustrating to you. It'll come up empty at the end. He goes on and says, "Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." Mm-hmm. All your worry, all your fear, all your stress that keeps you up late in the night, that makes you have to find some way to make you go to sleep because you can't go to sleep. He says all that's stirring inside you and bringing you to that place can be relieved if you put the proper foundation in place. Verse 2, "It's vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he gives his beloved sleep." Now you might think, what does all that have to do with parenting? Well, if you've been a parent, you know exactly. Sleep's precious. And when you get to a place of where you have a different center, a different place that your strength comes from, he can give you even sweet sleep during the parenting years. Verse 3, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward." It's not a disaster. It's not a punishment. It's not a beating. It's a gift. Yeah. And this determines your direction. Yeah. Knowing this truth, believing that, walking in that. Verse 4, Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has a quiver full of them, full of children, full of arrows, full of purpose. He says, they shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate. And here he likens children to being arrows that parents raise up for the purpose of sending them out straight, sharp, focused to hit a target that they might accomplish great things for the Lord. And when that becomes your focus, when this becomes your drive, it changes the whole process of parenting. So what we're attempting to do tonight is set this 20,000 foot view of parenting, because that's what's essential. You're going to make an unbelievable amount of decisions, thoughts, and actions over the whole parenting process, from the day that child's born till the day they are married or leave your home. And all of those decisions and impressions and interactions have to be shaped by something. And here, this scripture tells us, you must get that direction from the Lord. And when you do, when you get this sense of purpose and direction, and you center it and help them be focused, it will give you sleep at night, it'll give you peace in your heart, and it'll give you purpose for every step along the way. So that's our foundation as we begin tonight. This brings us to then what is your primary goal. This has to be the most important thing that you do. As a parent, your one goal must be shaped by this one thing. Every decision that you make, every attitude that you have, every prayer that you pray, dollar that you spend, discipline that you use, every word that you speak must be framed around this one goal. And it's written for us in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Here we have instructions in the early parts of the law that God gave his people. And he describes the whole process of parenting. He describes what a home is to be like. It fits with Psalm 127. I want to read what Deuteronomy 6 says. In verse 4, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. And you shall teach them diligently to your children. And you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates." Parents knew the responsibility for training up their children was theirs. They might have brought in others along the way to help in the process, but they owned it completely. Their heart was their responsibility. Their education was their responsibility. Their direction in life was their responsibility. They owned it. It didn't belong to the church. It didn't belong to the school. It didn't belong to anybody else. They might have used others in the process, but they owned the responsibility. It goes on in verse 20. It says, and here's why. Verse 20, "When your son asks you in time to come," when they get old enough and they want to start asking some things about faith, and they say, "What's the meaning of these testimonies, these statutes, and the judgments which the Lord has commanded you?" That's a great day, of course, when your child wants to know the reason why. That's not a time to scold or discipline. That's a time to celebrate. They're asking, and they ask you. It says, "Then you shall say to your son, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt." This was, of course, Old Testament perspective. "And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed signs and wonders before our eyes, great and severe, against Egypt, Pharaoh, and all his household. Then he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in to give us the land in which he swore to our fathers." Modern day application, you train your child and your children up in such a way that when they get to the age where they turn and say, "Dad, Mom, why do we go to church? Why do we read the Bible? Why do we pray? Why do we do these things?" Then you have the opportunity, and what you say next will be more important than what the church says, the school says, the friends say. And you say to them, "Let me tell you why." and they hear your story of how God worked in your heart to bring you out of a past of guilt and sin and fear, and he brought me, you tell your children that, and they hear those words, it will move them, and you will have shaped their heart in the process. And this is what our calling is. And this responsibility is for parents alone. This is our responsibility to teach them truth, but more importantly, to create desire in their heart to want to ask, to want to know, and to want to follow the same God that we do. Now, over the years, as Heather and I have parented, we've tried to stop along the way and evaluate how we're doing in this process, and we've done our best to create memories along the way to try to make times special, because we set up some early goals that we wanted for our kids, some things that we thought these are important to us. So Heather, talk about for just a moment some of the goals that we had together that we wanted our children to not just do, not in terms of education they would achieve or career they would find themselves into, but some things about their heart. What are some things that we talked about that we wanted to see them have in their heart?
Yes. Well, ultimately, obviously, we wanted each one of our kids to have a personal relationship with God. We also wanted them to love going to church, and we wanted it to be fun, and we wanted that to be a good memory. Going to church always being a good memory. We wanted them to want to be with each other, not just their friends, but we wanted them to love each other and love being at home together, and we wanted them to like us. We wanted them to be around us, and so we had to intentionally do some things that would create that.
That's true. And one of the things I'm grateful for, even during this time, is that we're filming this from the very living room where all of that happened. This is the spot where most of those experiences happened. Most of those memories were made. So thinking about memories, which is what we were intentional to try to do. Sometimes we created some memories that we wanted to forget, but sometimes those memories were good memories. So Holly, talk for just a moment maybe about a memory that you have from the past, something that stood out to you from a point in your childhood.
When you ask that, the first thing that comes to mind is a couple camping trips we went on with just Dad, which you wouldn't really catch me dead camping now. But not ever. Anyways, when we went a couple times, it was really me and Brianna and Hunter and Dad. We went on a couple of camping trips, and I just remember that being just like the greatest. It was so much fun because the only thing on the agenda was to explore, have fun, hang out together, try new things, cook over a campfire, and I thought that was just super, super fun, different, cool. It was cool getting to spend some time, because especially Taylor and Drew were younger at the time, so we got to have some more adult fun, even though I was like 7. But, something where it's just kind of the older kids and Dad that we got to go do something fun and special.
And me, Mom, and Truett had fun at home.
It's true. We did.
All right, Taylor, for you, a memory from childhood.
Yeah, I mean, we used to put on shows, and we would make up skits to storytelling songs, and I mean they were pretty elaborate. We made costumes.
Yeah,
I
kept us busy for
it was
a while.
Mainly you and Brianna that were.
Brianna was the director.
Brianna was the director. We were just her actors in it, but I mean we had costumes, we had our lines and our roles, and if people came over to the house, we were performing it, and we would turn the lights off, and it was very, very serious, and it was a very real thing.
That's good. Those memories help create moments that stood out in hearts for all of us, not just the children, but for us as well. And they create connection. They create this moment where hearts come together. And that, again, is really what it comes down to for us as Bible-believing parents, Jesus-following parents, is I want to win my child's heart. I want to know that their heart desires to follow God, that their heart desires to love us, and their heart desires to love others.
Yeah.
So along the way in parenting, this has to be something you keep in mind as the big picture goal, the perspective, the frame around parenting.
Yeah.
So if you think in terms of some heart goals, you might think in terms of, I want them to desire God. I want them to think that he is worth pursuing. I don't want them to think of him as unnecessary, uninteresting, or unrelatable. I want them to know that he is full of passion for them and for them to actually desire him. That takes work, and it shapes everything that you do as a parent. I want my children to have a willingness to listen to him, to have an awareness that he has something to say that's worth saying, that they would want to listen to him. And they will get that from how you speak to them.
That's true.
If your words to them create interest and come from love, then they will perceive, because they will naturally get their understanding of God from how you parent them. How you parent will create their picture. So this affects everything I do.
Yeah.
There are plenty of times I had to go back to my kids and say, I'm so sorry for the way I treated you, the thing I said to you, that thing that happened. I broke our relationship, and I'm sorry for that. Because I knew in that moment I had done something that not just broke our relationship, but as a parent, I was clearly aware I had done something to change their impression of what God is like. And so I want to keep that before my eyes. Everything I do helps shape their heart's view toward God, because I want them to worship. I want them to want to sing. I want them to want to pray to God. I want them to want to obey him, not just when they're in religious settings. I don't want them to just obey when I'm looking. I want them to obey because they truly desire to follow him. So this shapes now everything I do about parenting. And Heather and I have had lots of conversations in this process over the years that this has to be something we consider about. Okay, is this decision the right thing, or is this attitude, or this conversation, or this relationship right now? Do we need to stop and reevaluate this? So igniting in your child a desire to love God, seek God, that's the first one. But then winning their heart also to us as parents. I knew if I was going to win their heart to God, I had to win their heart to me. I had to keep that as my goal. Yeah. And so that became a daily thing for me. Have I won my children's heart? Can I still walk into their room now and then want to talk to me, want to be with me? Do they find me interesting and loving and kind and compassionate? Or are they wanting me out of their life? Or do they find me irrelevant? Or do they find me harsh and condemning? I knew I had to keep that. And so that meant I had to be sensitive to how I spoke to them. And it means I had to be sensitive to each birth order, each gender that they were, so I could change to shape and win their heart. Yeah. That meant lots of conversations. It was different things. For Hunter, as a teenager who's listening to a style of music that wasn't mine necessarily, it meant lots of drives around while he's learning to drive, listening to a lot of music that he loved to listen to. And I learned to like his music. It meant with Taylor, spending time with her, doing things that she enjoyed doing. Every one of them was different. And so I had to work, Heather and I both did, in the process, to win their heart. And then the third one, not just win their heart to love God, win their heart to love us, but win their heart to love others, to create in them a desire to love each other as siblings, to get along. There were times we had to have family meetings because there was tension in the house, and that had to be dealt with. And for us, one of the goals was for us to love one another. Yeah. So keeping that central drove us to that point. Now, we grew over the years in what that meant. When Heather and I we had Brienne and Holly, we parented with what we knew at the time.
Yep.
Hunter came along, Taylor came along, Truett came along. With each one that came along, we learned some things and we adjusted some things.
And we relaxed.
That's true.
We were able to relax.
That's true. We were uptight in those early years. And in the process, the older kids look at how we parent the younger kids and say, "Hey, what are you doing? You never did that with us." We were learning along the way. So, Holly, second born, what are some things you saw over the years that you saw us do differently with, say, you and Brianna, and I'll put them together because they were pretty close in age, that were different in maybe how we parented Hunter, Taylor, Truett?
With us, it seemed like it started out more kind of strict and behavior modifying parents, kind of, you need to follow the rules, you need to do this, it doesn't matter at all, you just got to do this.
Instant obedience
Yeah,
is what we required.
Yes, yes. Which we didn't necessarily think anything of because that's all we knew. But, as we got older and as we saw, the younger ones being parented differently, and as we were parented differently as well, it was, so much more relaxed. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but like it came across as more kind of loving and understanding rather than, I don't care what you have to say, this is what you have to do. And so seeing that, and that's helped me with my parenting as well, to not start out quite as strict and wanting the, behavior modifying, but to have seen them parent the younger ones helps me to start with more of a little bit more relaxed and understanding and a lot more grace.
That's good.
So
That's good.
yeah.
We were definitely learning in the process, and it was a learning process over the years with 5 kids, and some of them became helper parents along the way for us in parenting the younger kids. But we tried to keep this goal, though, of winning their heart to one another, winning their heart to us, and winning their heart to God. With those 3 goals, we shaped how we parented. And I believe from Scripture this is what our calling is. When God gave the law in the book of Deuteronomy, and he talks about these things that I teach you today shall be in your heart, and you talk about them while you're with your children, when you're in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. It was an all life activity. It wasn't something you did on one day of the week only. It wasn't something you did 1 hour of the week or day only. It was something that encompassed how you lived. Parents were charged with this responsibility and opportunity to teach their children what God is like. So let this, as we begin, be what we do first. This is now our goal. This is our framework. Model this to your children. Show them that this is the way. This is what God looks like. Along the way, measure your progress. And the way you measure your progress is your child's heart. You look and you see, can I walk into their room and them be honest and open with me? Are they being vulnerable, expressive, and open with me? If I have their heart, then I know I'm walking in the right path. And then the third thing is mature in parenting. Model it, measure it, and mature in it. Grow in it. You're not going to be a year from now where you are today, and that'll be okay. That'll be a good thing, in fact, that you change, that you mature, that you grow in this process. But this will become guiding foundational principles for us as we move forward in this whole parenting process. This is a new way of parenting. This is what God calls us to. And I would encourage you to use the questions there that are at the bottom of the page. We have a section called Table Talk. The questions there would help you as a couple. I'd encourage you to sit down together. Maybe it's the last thing you do before you turn off the light at night. You're in bed. Maybe it's something you do for breakfast in the morning. We've all got some time together these days. So this is a great time to do that. How is this approach to parenting different or similar to how you were parented? Great conversational approach right there. What is your initial response to this level of opportunity and responsibility? What is this, when this hits you, what do you think about all this? How does it hit your heart? How does it hit your mind? And then what's most exciting about parenting from this perspective? Use those questions. And then a couple of good books I've listed down there for you on the page as well at the bottom. The first is Grace-Based Parenting, Set Your Family Free by Dr. Tim Kimmel. And then Parenting, 14 Gospel Principles That Can Radically Change Your Family by Paul David Tripp. There you go. So the last page I'd point you to that's in the handouts is a piece of homework for you, something that you can do as a couple together. And it is a worksheet that will help you define your parenting goals. What this looks like, what we've talked about, what the scripture calls us to, this is what we've told you is what it looked like in our family. You have the responsibility of sitting down and seeing what it looks like in your family, based on where you've come from, what your home life is like, how many children you have, the birth order, gender, all that kind of stuff. You have to frame it in your home. Use the framework that we've given to work through these things and talk about what kind of heart do you want your child to have. And think long term. Think in the day that they are graduating from high school, the day they're standing at a marriage altar, the day they're leaving, they're driving off, go to college. Don't ever start crying, everybody. But set that out there as the goal and say, all right, when they're at that point, what do I want their heart to be like? Their heart towards God, their heart towards us, their heart towards one another and other people. When you sit down and work these out, write it down, discuss it, then you'll be able to walk forward in these next 6 weeks that will follow and know I now have the framework that I need to build upon. So I'm glad you joined us tonight for our first week of vertical parenting. I'm excited about next week as we get back together. We'll be talking about how to lead the way instead of being led astray. How to stay focused in a world that will pull you in a million different directions. So thank y'all for being here tonight. Each week we're going to have a different set of our kids sitting here at the table with us answering some questions. So I'm grateful for Holly and Taylor doing this tonight. And Heather and I will look forward to seeing y'all next week. God bless.